Water Shortages, Water Solutions by Tessely Jen and Chloe Delafield. Introduction. Everyone needs water to survive. However, more than 1 billion people around the world do not have enough water. Water is a limited resource, and there's often not enough of it available where and when people need it. There are many things that can cause a lack of available water, called a water shortage. A water shortage doesn't necessarily mean there is no water around. It means that there is not enough clean, usable fresh water available to meet people's needs. Overuse, pollution, and drought are 3 major causes of water shortages. Each of these issues is more common in some places than others, but most parts of the world are affected by water shortages. This book is about water shortages in the United States and around the world, and some solutions to water problems. Here we see the reservoir collects fresh water for people to use. The water level is very low because of drought. The water normally goes to the top of the white part of the hill. On the other caption we see, this river is polluted and the water is not safe for people to use. Pollution like this contributes to water shortages. Too many people, not enough precipitation. In 2015, California was experiencing its worst drought on record. The state was in a long period of dry weather with very little precipitation, snow or rain. Millions of trees had died. Wildfires were raging across the state. Farms had not been able to produce as much food. Farmers in California grow 2/3 of the fruit and over 1/3 of the vegetables eaten in the U.S. This means the drought had a big impact around the country. Many people thought there would be enough precipitation in the winter of 2015 to stop the drought, but there was not. There was much less rain and snow than predicted. Meanwhile, the population of California kept growing. That means there were more people using what little water there was available. The water level in reservoirs kept decreasing as people used water on farms and in cities. Some communities in California made rules about water usage. These rules restricted when people could use water, what they could use it for, and how much they could use. The rules were effective for getting people to conserve water, but they required people and businesses to make changes that were not always easy. Scientists predict that California may experience more frequent droughts as the climate around the world changes. Water restrictions may become stricter and more common. This reservoir in California is dry. This lake is completely dried up. The picture shows a pier that used to go out into the water. This water tap in a state park is locked because of restrictions on water use. This California lawn is brown because the owners have stopped watering the grass. They are conserving water. Drought down under. In Australia, nicknamed Down Under, people mainly get water from surface freshwater reservoirs. The water in these reservoirs comes from rain, so when there's less rain during a drought, the reservoirs get less water. There's not as much fresh water available for people to use. People experience water shortages as they use what little water there is. Droughts happen often in Australia. As the climate around the world changes, droughts may become even more common and severe in Australia and other parts of the world. The Millennium Drought, which occurred in the years around 2000, was an especially bad drought that affected much of southern Australia. Some areas got less than 30% of their normal rainfall. The amount of water in rivers decreased so much that some rivers stopped flowing completely. Farmers suffered because the lack of water meant they could not grow as many crops. People in cities watched their freshwater supply decrease. In some places, the freshwater supply dropped to less than half of the normal amount. The Australian government took action to address the widespread water shortages. They designed many solutions to the problem. The solutions included creating pipelines to bring water to areas with the worst water shortages and restricting the amount of water that people were allowed to use. They also treated and recycled wastewater that people produced. They built equipment to get fresh water from salty ocean water. Though Australia continues to experience droughts, these actions help communities survive when there's not much rain. Here in this caption, a farmer drives a tractor over dry farmland in Australia. These Australian cows are going hungry. The plants they eat cannot grow in the drought. The Disappearing River. For 6 million years, the Colorado River flowed for more than 2,400 kilometers, or 1,500 miles. It flowed through lakes, waterfalls, and valleys. It supported a huge wetland in Mexico. In many places, the Colorado River flowed through the desert where there was not much other water. Many millions of plants and animals, including humans, depended on the Colorado River to get the water they needed. For the last 100 years, the Colorado River has been shrinking. In some places, it is totally dry. What happened to make this huge river smaller? The problem is overuse. Beginning in the 1920s, engineers built dams, canals, pipes, and reservoirs to send water from the Colorado River to cities and farms. Now, 30 million people in cities like Los Angeles, San Diego, and Phoenix get their water from the Colorado River. People use the water in their homes and businesses. The water is used for millions of acres of farms. More and more water from the river is being used, but there has not been extra precipitation to replace that water. Now, many groups are working to save the Colorado River. There are programs that help individuals and businesses use less water. Farmers are finding solutions that allow them to grow the same amount of food with less water. Engineers are working on solutions to keep more water in reservoirs for people to use. Old dams are being removed so that water can flow freely in the river again. There is still a long way to go, but programs like these are helping the Colorado River. Here we see the Colorado River creates green areas in a dry landscape. This area used to be filled with flowing water. Now there is just a small puddle. This city in Nevada is built in the desert. The city's residents get their water from the Colorado River. The Shrinking Sea. The Aral Sea is a freshwater lake in the middle of a desert in Central Asia. It was once the fourth largest lake in the world, with an area of 68,000 square kilometers, or 26,300 square miles. Thousands of fishermen depended on the lake. The water in the lake came from two large rivers. The rivers flowed from faraway mountains where it rained and snowed. In the 1960s, engineers built a huge system of canals, dams, and reservoirs to use the water from these rivers. They used the river water to transform desert land into farms. As the water in the rivers went to farms, there was less left to flow into the Aral Sea. Without more water flowing in, the lake started to dry up. It became much smaller than it had been before. Overuse of river water to grow food in the desert left little for people near the lake. As the lake disappeared, so did the fish. Without fish, the fishing communities that depended on the lake could not survive. Most people had to move out of the area. The fishermen left their boats behind. To help the situation, people are changing the way they grow crops so that they use less water. People have also built a dam to catch river water. That has refilled a small part of the Aral Sea. The fish populations are increasing in that area. Some fishermen have been able to return. Here we can see the Aral Sea in 2000. It looks really big. It says the black outline shows the approximate shoreline of the lake in 1960. And then here we can see the Aral Sea in 2009. So it used to be this big, this huge outline. Over here we can see fishing boats sit on dry land that used to be part of the Aral Sea. Fertilizer in the water. In the 1990s, residents of a small city in Wisconsin discovered that the groundwater they depended on for drinking water was polluted. The problem was not waste from sewers or factory. It was wastewater from farms, water that got polluted by fertilizer when it was used to water crops. Farmers use fertilizer to help grow crops for people all over the country. We all depend on farmers to grow our food, and most farmers depend on fertilizer. However, fertilizer from farms can get into freshwater supplies. This happens when the farm's wastewater flows into rivers and reservoirs or soaks into the soil and gets into groundwater. Even though fertilizer helps crops grow, it can be very dangerous when too much gets in the water. This type of pollution can have serious health risks for humans. It can also make plants grow too fast, and that can cause problems in ecosystems. This is one of the most widespread forms of pollution in the U.S. It is affecting freshwater supplies in many places. The government of that city in Wisconsin worked with scientists and people in the community. They developed a solution to protect their freshwater supply. They tracked levels of pollution in the water and used the information to make decisions about how to use land. They also helped farmers put solutions in place to use less fertilizer. By 2009, the water was safe to drink again. The solution worked in this case. However, pollution from fertilizer is still a huge problem around the U.S. In some places, there is no clean fresh water available, and people must buy bottled water to drink and cook with. Wisconsin has many farms which use lots of fertilizer. A farmer spreads fertilizer on a field. Wastewater from farms carries fertilizer into freshwater supplies. Pollution problems. El Salvador gets a lot of rain, almost 2 meters or 6 feet each year, so it may be surprising that the country has widespread problems with water. In El Salvador, the problem is not so much a lack of fresh water, but a lack of clean fresh water. Over 90% of El Salvador's surface freshwater is polluted. The main sources of pollution are farms, mines, and household waste. When people use fresh water, they often pollute the water. In El Salvador, the wastewater people produce often gets dumped back into the rivers and lakes that they depend on for fresh water. Farms use pesticides to protect their crops from insects. These pesticides end up in the water that flows from the farmland to lakes and rivers. Mining companies use a lot of water, as well as toxic materials, to get metals out of the land. This creates a lot of wastewater full of toxins. Many mining companies dump this wastewater into rivers without treating it. In addition, many communities do not have proper sewage systems to deal with human waste, so sewage flows into rivers. After the people of El Salvador protested about these problems for years, the government began protecting El Salvador's freshwater supplies and improving access to clean fresh water. Deep wells that reach unpolluted groundwater have brought clean fresh water to some communities. The government has stopped letting people mine for metal. That has also prevented further pollution of the country's surface freshwater. However, pollution is still a widespread problem, and there is much work to be done to protect freshwater supplies. People dig deep wells to access clean water, fresh water in El Salvador. Conclusion: pollution, overuse, and drought all result in the same problem: not enough clean fresh water available to people. In the case of pollution, the available fresh water is being contaminated. Even though there may be a lot of fresh water, it is not clean and safe to use. Overuse and drought cause water shortages for different reasons. In the case of overuse, there is too much water being used, so the available amount decreases. In the case of drought, there is less water flowing into an area, so the available amount is lower to begin with. Often, more than one problem happens in the same place at the same time. Many people around the world are dealing with water shortages. Even in areas that are not currently affected by water shortages, it is important to conserve water. People around the world are working on ways to save fresh water so generations to come will have access to this precious resource. Are there water problems where you live? What do you think you could do to help solve them?